My wife looked me in the eye and asked for one night to cheat before we had kids. I didn't flinch. I packed her bags, dropped her off, and went back to work. She called it honesty. I called it the beginning of the end. Hers, not mine. My name is Grant Branson. I'm 41 years old. I lived, in a two-story townhouse in the Midtown neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. I've been married to Mila Branson for 6 years. She's a PR director at a mid-size agency called Vantage Communications. Polished, persuasive, always dressed like she was about to be photographed. I used to think that was ambition. I understand now it was performance. We have been talking about children for almost a year. Not casually, seriously. We'd visited a fertility specialist twice. We had a joint savings account earmarked for IVF, if it came to that. We called it our foundation account. $44,000, built carefully over 3 years. She had chosen the name herself. I should have asked more questions. The morning she made her request was a Tuesday in early March. I remember the light, pale and flat, the kind Atlanta gets in late winter when the sky can't quite decide what season it wants to be. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open, reviewing a risk assessment for a client in Charlotte. Mila came downstairs in a silk robe, poured herself coffee, and sat across from me like she had something rehearsed. She did. "Grant," she said, setting down her mug with a careful click. "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you react." I closed the laptop. When someone starts with that sentence, you close the laptop. "I've been thinking," she continued, her voice steady, almost professional, "about us. About what we're stepping into. Having kids, the whole next chapter." She paused, and I realized there's something I need before we get there. One night. Just one. I want the freedom to be with someone else. Fully, before we close that door for good. I'm not asking permission to leave you. I'm asking for one night to live something I've been carrying around, so I can let it go and be fully present for our life together. I didn't yell. I didn't move. I sat very still and listened to the refrigerator hum. She kept talking, something about honesty and fairness, and not wanting to spend the rest of her life wondering. The words kept coming, but I'd already heard everything I needed to. The woman across from me had spent months planning how to pitch this. She'd chosen a Tuesday morning, when I'd be calm and focused. She'd worn the robe she knew I liked. She'd even framed it as a gift, to us, to the marriage, to our future children. I smiled, not because I agreed, because I finally understood what I was dealing with. "Okay," I said. She blinked. "Okay. Sure. One night. But not from here." I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out the larger of our 2 rolling suitcases. She followed me to the bedroom doorway, watching as I opened her side of the closet and began folding clothes into the bag, efficiently, without anger, the same way I pack for a business trip. "Grant, what are you doing?" "Helping you get started," I said. "You want freedom. You're not going to find it in our house." I didn't say I was leaving. "I know." I zipped the bag and set it upright. "I did." She stared at me for a long moment, confused, then calculating, then something close to frightened. I carried the suitcase downstairs, set it by the front door, and picked up my keys. The drive to her mother's house in Buckhead took 18 minutes. Mila sat in the passenger seat without speaking. When I pulled up to Nadine Cross's driveway, she finally said, "This isn't what I meant." "I know exactly what you meant," I told her. "That's the problem." I waited until she stepped out. Then I drove home. Back in the kitchen, I reopened my laptop. The Charlotte assessment was still on the screen. I finished it in 40 minutes, sent it before noon, and billed it at my standard rate. Some things you can still control. You focus on those first. The first thing I did the morning after I dropped Mila at her mother's house was make coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and open our joint financial accounts. Not out of anger. Out of habit. When something breaks in a structure, you start with the foundation. I pulled up the IVF savings account first, the one we call the foundation account. $44,000, built over 3 years of careful discipline. I remember the last time we'd reviewed it together. Mila had smiled and said, "We're almost there." I thought she meant the baby. I understand now, she meant something else entirely. The balance on screen read $27,400. I sat back and stared at that number for a long time. $16,600 was gone. Not in one transfer. In a series of withdrawals spread over 4 months, each one between $2,000 and $4,000, Each one timed on a Friday afternoon when I was typically traveling for client work. Whoever had done it knew my schedule. Of course she did. I didn't call Mila. I didn't text. I opened a new document and started building a timeline. Dates of withdrawals, amounts, any corresponding events I could remember. It's what I do for a living. Map the pattern before you name the problem. By noon, I had enough to call Sabrina Holt. Sabrina had been my attorney on a corporate dispute 2 years earlier. Sharp, methodical, allergic to drama. She picked up on the second ring. Grant. Her voice was neutral. I was wondering when you'd call. You heard. Mila's mother called my office this morning. Said you'd thrown Mila out without warning, and she was concerned about your mental state. A pause. I told her I hadn't been retained by anyone and couldn't comment. I need to retain you, I said. Today. I figured. Come in at 3. At Sabrina's office, I laid out the account withdrawals, the timeline, and what Mila had said to me at the kitchen table. Sabrina listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I respect most about her. When I finished, she set down her pen. The withdrawals are clean enough to be disputed, she said. Joint account, her name on it. She'll claim it was household management. It wasn't. I know that. But we need to know where it went. She leaned forward. Do you have any idea who she's been spending time with? I told her about Dorian Ashby. The name had surfaced 2 weeks earlier. Mila had mentioned him casually, the way you mentioned something you've already rehearsed. A gallery owner, very interesting. She'd been consulting for his PR launch. I hadn't thought twice about it at the time. Now I pulled up his name on my phone and slid it across Sabrina's desk. She studied it. Dorian Ashby. I know that name. He opened a gallery in Buckhead about 8 months ago. High-end, lots of press, the kind of place that sells more atmosphere than art. I need to know if Mila's money went anywhere near him. Sabrina nodded. I have someone I use for exactly this kind of work. His name is Curtis Bowman. He's thorough, and he doesn't talk. I authorized a retainer before I left the building. That evening, I got the first text from Mila. Just checking in. Can we talk soon? I read it, set the phone face down, and went back to the risk assessment I was finishing for a client in Nashville. 2 hours later, another message. Grant, I think we both need to calm down and approach this like adults. I left that one unanswered too. The silence wasn't a statement. It was information gathering. Every response I didn't give her was a data point she couldn't use against me. 3 days later, Curtis Bowman called. Mr. Branson, he said, his voice unhurried and flat. I've got a preliminary picture for you. You want a short version or the full version? Full version. Dorian Ashby's gallery received 2 private investment contributions in the last 4 months. Neither one is publicly listed. The amounts match the withdrawals from your joint account. Not exactly, but within margins that suggest a pass-through. She may have broken them up to avoid a paper trail. He paused. There's more. Your wife has been seen at the gallery on at least 6 separate occasions outside business hours. The last visit was the night before she had that conversation with you. I wrote the numbers down, matched them against my timeline. They fit. One more thing, Curtis said. I ran a standard background pass on Ashby. He had a business partner 2 years ago, a man named Rafe Quinlan, ran a design firm out of Charlotte. They had a falling out. Rafe's company folded, and he dropped off the professional map shortly after. I'm still pulling the thread, but it's worth knowing. Keep pulling, I said. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window with my hands in my pockets. Outside, the Atlanta skyline was doing what it always does. Indifferent, busy, unimpressed by whatever any one person is going through. I'd always liked that about cities. They don't stop for you. The next morning, I ran into Wade Langley in the elevator of our building. Wade was 67, a former district attorney who'd retired to the same floor 3 years ago. We'd shared maybe a dozen conversations over the years, the kind of quiet, substantive exchanges 2 men have when they recognize each other as the same type. He looked at me as the doors closed, then looked away. Then he said, without preamble, there was a man in this building I didn't recognize. Came up to your floor twice in the last 2 months. Average height, expensive coat, drove a black Porsche Cayenne. He kept his eyes forward. I didn't think it was my place to say anything. I'm saying it now. I looked at him. What changed? Mila's not here anymore, he said simply. So, I figure the time for discretion has passed. The elevator opened on the lobby. We both stepped out. Thank you, Wade, I said. He gave a single nod. Whatever you need. I texted Curtis Bowman one line. Dorian Ashby drives a black Porsche Cayenne. He was in my building. The reply came back in 4 minutes. Already in the file. Curtis Bowman didn't look like what most people imagine when they picture a private investigator. He was trim, quiet, wore plain clothes, and had the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd 30 seconds after seeing it. I figured that was probably the most important qualification for the job. He came to my office on a Thursday morning and set a manila folder on my desk, without ceremony. Dorian Ashby, he said, sitting across from me. 44 years old. Born in Savannah, built his reputation in New York, relocated to Atlanta 14 months ago. The gallery is registered as an LLC, Ashby Fine Arts Group. On paper, it's capitalized well. In reality, 2 of his 3 primary investors pulled back 6 months ago over questions about valuation inconsistencies on consignment pieces. Curtis tapped the folder. He needed fresh money. Quietly. I looked at the documents. Bank routing traces, partial investment records, a summary of public filings. Solid, methodical work. The money from our joint account, I said. Can't prove direct transfer yet, Curtis said. But the timing and the amounts align with 2 deposits into a consulting LLC registered to a woman named Petra Vaughn. She has no verifiable clients. The LLC address is a mail drop in Midtown. He paused. Petra Vaughn is also listed as Dorian Ashby's emergency contact on his gallery's commercial lease. Shell company. My wife's money, routed through a ghost entity tied to her lover's business. I'd seen this structure before, in corporate fraud cases, not in my own kitchen. What about Rafe Quinlan? I asked. Curtis's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened slightly. That's where it gets interesting. Quinlan was Ashby's business partner in New York. They ran a joint venture, art advisory firm. It collapsed 2 years ago. Officially, the dissolution was mutual. Unofficially, Quinlan has been trying to get a fraud complaint taken seriously for 18 months. Nobody's listened to him yet. Curtis folded his hands. He reached out to me last night. He'd seen my inquiry cross a contact he has. He wants to talk to you directly. Set it up, I said. That weekend, I met Rafe Quinlan by phone, his choice, not mine. He was in Charlotte, cautious, talked in short sentences like a man who'd been burned by being too open before. He told me that Dorian Ashby had a pattern. Identify a partner with access to stable money, build intimacy quickly, extract investment through informal channels, then engineer a reason for the relationship to end before the financial exposure became visible. He did it to me professionally, Rafe said. With you, he went personal. That's an escalation. Why hasn't anyone stopped him? Because by the time people figure it out, they're too embarrassed to go on record. A pause. Are you embarrassed? No, I said. I'm building a file. Rafe sent me a document package that evening. Emails, wire transfer records, a timeline of Ashby's New York operation. I forwarded everything to Sabrina Holt before midnight. Her response came at 7 the next morning. This is significant. We need to meet Monday. Don't tip your hand to Mila yet. I didn't intend to. What I did instead was go for a run. 6 miles through Piedmont Park in the early morning cold, earbuds in, mind running through variables the way it does when I'm working a complex risk assessment. By the time I got back to the townhouse, I had a clear picture of what I was dealing with. Mila hadn't just asked for one night of freedom. She'd been funding a man's business with our family money for months, building a parallel life while I sat across from her at the breakfast table talking about fertility specialists. The request hadn't been impulsive. It had been a closing argument. Wade Langley was collecting his mail in the lobby when I came back in, still cooling down from the run. He looked me over the way older men sometimes do, not intrusively, just assessing. You look like you're working something out, he said. Getting there, I said. He handed me a slip of paper. On it was a license plate number. That's the Porsche Cayenne. I noted it the second time I saw it. Didn't know then if I'd need it. He shrugged once. Old habit. Former district attorney. Of course he kept notes. I texted the plate to Curtis before the elevator doors opened on my floor. By afternoon, he had a confirmation. The vehicle was registered to Dorian Ashby's personal name, not the LLC. He'd been in my building. Twice. While I was in Nashville and Charlotte on client work. I sat with that for a while. Then I called Sabrina and told her to begin drafting a separation framework. Not because I was rushing, because I was ready. Sabrina Holt worked the way I work. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. When I walked in her office Monday morning, she had 3 documents already drafted and a legal pad with 11 numbered points. Before we go through these, she said. I want you to know something. Mila's mother retained an attorney over the weekend. Someone named Krebs at a family law firm downtown. They filed a preliminary contact request, essentially a formal nudge to open negotiation. She set down her pen. They're expecting you to be reactive. Don't be. What do they want? The house. Or rather, continued access to it. Possibly spousal support. She said it flatly, the way a doctor names a diagnosis. Her position will be that you made a unilateral decision to remove her from the marital home without cause. I packed a suitcase, I said. I didn't change the locks. You also cut her card access to the joint account the following morning, after I found $16,000 missing. Sabrina nodded, which is why we file first. She slid the top document across the desk. This is a formal notice of financial misconduct within the marriage. It cites the 4-month withdrawal pattern, the timeline, and the indirect connection to Ashby's LLC. Once this is filed, her attorney can't pretend the money conversation isn't happening. I read through it. Precise, thorough, no emotional language. Exactly right. Second item, Sabrina continued. I want you to go through your home office tonight and pull anything with both your names on it. Insurance policies, investment accounts, vehicle titles, the mortgage documents. We need a complete picture of jointly held assets before they start making claims. I spent that evening doing exactly that. It was methodical, quiet work, the kind that keeps your hands busy while your mind processes harder things. In the back of the filing cabinet, behind a row of tax folders, I found something I wasn't looking for. A small pharmacy bag, stapled shut, with a receipt dated 14 months ago. Inside was an empty blister pack, the kind used for daily oral contraceptives. I sat on the floor of the home office with that blister pack in my hand for a long time. 14 months ago, we had been 6 months into active fertility discussions. We'd already had our first consultation at the clinic. We had started the foundation account. Mila had cried, at the appointment when the doctor talked about timelines. And she had been taking contraceptives. I put the pack in a Ziploc bag, labeled it with the date I found it, and put it in the folder I was building for Sabrina. I didn't feel rage. I felt the specific, hollow clarity of a man who has just found the last piece of a puzzle and realizes the picture was never what he thought it was. The next morning, Sabrina called with something new. A contact at the fertility clinic, not a formal channel, just a professional acquaintance, had flagged something discreetly. Mila had come in for a solo appointment 11 months ago. She'd requested a personal egg freezing consultation, separate from our joint treatment plan. The request had been filed under her personal insurance, not our joint policy. She was building an exit strategy while we were building a family. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 10 minutes after that call. Just sat. Then I drove to the office, pulled up the Charlotte risk assessment I'd been delaying, and finished it in 2 hours. Control what you can control. Everything else is just noise until you're ready to answer it. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Mr. Branson. The voice was male, measured, slightly too smooth. My name is Dorian Ashby. I think it would be in both our interests to speak privately. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. I understand things are complicated right now, he continued. I want you to know I have nothing but respect for what you've built. I think there's a way to resolve this quietly, for everyone's benefit. Another pause. I'm prepared to make a financial gesture, something meaningful, if we can agree to keep this between us. I looked at my desk, at the folder with Rafe Quinlan's documents, at the Ziploc bag with the contraceptive blister pack inside. I'm going to need you to say that again, I said calmly. More clearly this time. He did. A number, $200,000, for my silence and a mutual agreement to walk away without legal action. I ended the call, pulled up the Georgia single-party consent recording law on my laptop, confirmed I'd been well within my rights, and sent the audio file to Sabrina within the hour. Her text back was 4 words. This just changed everything. Sabrina Holt had a particular way of delivering good news. She didn't smile. She just became slightly more still than usual, like a woman who's learned that composure is more powerful than celebration. When I walked in her office the morning after Dorian Ashby's phone call, she was already still. The recording is clean, she said. Single-party consent in Georgia is unambiguous. He named a dollar amount, described it as a gesture in exchange for your silence, and used the phrase, keep this between us. That's a textbook attempt to obstruct a potential civil proceeding. She set the transcript on the desk in front of me. He doesn't know he handed us a weapon. I read through it. Hearing the words in print was different from hearing them on the phone. Colder. More deliberate. What do we do with it? I asked. We hold it, Sabrina said. We don't file it yet. We let his attorney keep pushing the informal negotiation track, and we let them believe they still have leverage. The moment they understand what we're holding, the dynamic shifts completely. She folded her hands. Their next move will be a settlement offer through Krebs. Probably this week. I want you to hear it, say nothing, and let me respond. The offer came on Thursday. Krebs, Mila's attorney, requested a four-way meeting and neutral downtown office. Sabrina agreed. We sat across a walnut conference table from Krebs, a compact woman in her 50s who telegraphed aggression through careful politeness, and Mila, who came in dressed in gray and kept her eyes on the table in front of her rather than on me. I hadn't seen her in 11 days. She looked composed. Rehearsed. Krebs opened with the expected framing. Mutual separation, no fault attributed, reasonable division of jointly held assets, temporary spousal support, while Mila established independent housing. Standard opening position. Built for a man who felt guilty. I didn't feel guilty. Sabrina waited until Krebs finished, then opened her own folder with the same unhurried patience she brought to everything. She walked through the withdrawal timeline, the Petrovon LLC, the indirect connection to Ashby's gallery funding, the fertility clinic's record of Mila's solo egg freezing consultation. She placed each item on the table like she was dealing cards, measured, precise, unhurried. Krebs's expression didn't break, but her posture changed. Small adjustments. The kind you make when the ground shifts under you. Mila looked up at me for the first time. You've been building this for weeks, she said quietly. I've been building it since the morning you asked me for permission to be with another man, I said. You just didn't notice because you weren't watching. Grant. I'm not angry, Mila. I kept my voice even. I'm just done pretending the last 4 months didn't happen. The money is documented. The clinic visit is documented. The phone call is documented. I paused. All of it. Krebs leaned toward Mila and said something low. Mila shook her head slightly. Then Krebs straightened and said, We'd like to recess and reconvene. Take the time you need, Sabrina said pleasantly. Outside in the hallway, while Sabrina stepped away to make a call, I stood at the window overlooking Peachtree Street and thought about nothing in particular. Just the traffic below, moving in both directions, indifferent to everything happening 11 floors up. Shane Pruitt texted me that afternoon, a man I'd met 3 weeks earlier through mutual contact in my industry. Shane was 45, ran a mid-sized logistics firm, and had been through his own version of this 2 years prior. He'd suggested coffee once. I declined. He texted again, whenever you're ready. No pressure. This time I replied, Saturday morning work? His answer came back in under a minute. I'll send you the address. The group Shane Pruitt had built wasn't what I expected. No folding chairs in a church basement, no round-robin of grievances. It met in a private room at a members-only club near Ponce City Market. 8 men, all professionally established, all somewhere in the process of a serious personal unraveling. The conversation was direct, occasionally blunt, and entirely free of self-pity. These were men who had decided that getting through something meant understanding it, not just surviving it. Shane opened with the same line every time. He told me later, You didn't fail. You were operated on without anesthesia. There's a difference. I appreciated that. What I shared that Saturday was limited. I wasn't ready to lay everything out, but what I took away was significant. 2 men in the room had dealt with financial deception inside a marriage. One had lost a business. Both had rebuilt. The common thread wasn't the damage. It was the decision to stop treating the situation as something that had happened to them and start treating it as a problem to be solved. I drove home with that thought sitting solidly in my chest. Monday brought a new development. Curtis Bowman called mid-morning, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man delivering something he knows will reframe everything. I went back further on Ashby's business history, he said. 3 years ago, before New York, he was operating a small advisory firm in Charlotte. There was a civil complaint filed against him by a former associate, someone who claimed Ashby had used confidential client introductions to source his own side deals. The complaint was settled quietly. Curtis paused. The complainant was a man named Harlan Voss. He runs a risk consulting firm in Charlotte. I went very still. Harlan Voss was not a friend. He was a competitor. Had been since we both pitched the same regional bank contract 4 years ago, and he'd won it on price. We had a professionally civil relationship that involved a fair amount of quiet mutual distrust. But he had history with Dorian Ashby, and that made him useful. I called Voss directly. He picked up on the third ring and went quiet for a moment when I told him why I was calling. Ashby, he said finally. I wondered when that name would come back around. We talked for 30 minutes. Voss was careful, measured, shared enough to be useful without committing to anything formal. He confirmed the Charlotte complaint, confirmed the settlement, and confirmed that Ashby had used an intermediary, a woman, to funnel extracted funds. Same structure. Different city, different woman, same playbook. I'm not in a position to go on record, Voss said. But I'm also not going to pretend I don't know what he is. I'm not asking you to go on record, I said. I just needed to know the pattern was real. It's real, Voss said. Watch your back, Branson. And watch your file. That evening, I went through the home office again, more methodically this time, working from back to front through every drawer and cabinet. In the bottom drawer of Mila's old desk, in a folder labeled Personal, Tax Miscellaneous, I found 2 things that hadn't been there before her departure, which meant she'd left them deliberately or forgotten them entirely. The first was a printed email confirmation for a storage unit rental, taken out in her name alone, 7 months ago, at a facility indicator. The second was a business card. No title, no company, just a name, Petra Vaughn, and a personal cell number written in Mila's handwriting on the back. I photographed both items, put them in the evidence folder, and texted Sabrina. Found a storage unit rental and a direct contact card for the LLC name. Sending photos now. Her reply was immediate. That storage unit is now relevant to asset discovery. I'll subpoena the access logs tomorrow. I set my phone down and sat in the quiet of the home office. The house felt different now. Not empty, exactly, but clarified. Like a room after you've moved out all the furniture and can finally see the actual dimensions of the space. I thought about Harlan Voss, my professional rival, the man I'd competed against for years, calling Dorian Ashby exactly what he was without hesitation. Sometimes the people you least expect to be useful turn out to be the ones who already did the work. That was the thing about building a real file. Eventually, the picture stopped being about Mila at all. It became about a pattern. And patterns, in my line of work, are the most reliable thing there is. 3 weeks after I dropped Mila at her mother's house, she gave an interview. I found out about it the same way most people find out about things they weren't supposed to see, through a third party who assumed I already knew. A former colleague texted me a link on a Tuesday evening with a message. Saw this. Figured you'd want to know. The link went to a lifestyle media site that covered Atlanta's professional and social scene. The kind of publication that ran profiles of women redefining success on their own terms. The piece was titled Finding Herself After the Fall. Mila hadn't used my name. She didn't need to. She described a marriage to a man who was brilliant at reading risk in business, but completely blind to the human cost of his own emotional distance. She talked about feeling invisible, undervalued, like a supporting character in someone else's story. She said she had asked for something honest and been punished for it. 240 comments. Most of them sympathetic. A handful skeptical. Somewhere in there, the version of me that existed in her telling was being discussed by strangers who had no idea what the foundation account balance looked like 4 months ago. I read the piece twice. Then I closed the tab and called Sabrina. I saw it, she said before I could speak. Don't respond publicly. Don't post anything. Don't send a correction. Don't call her. I wasn't going to. I know you weren't. I'm saying it anyway because it matters. She paused. Here's what we do instead. Forbes reached out to my office last week. They're doing a regional feature on risk management firms that have expanded during economic uncertainty. Your firm qualifies. I think you should do it. I don't do press. You do now, Sabrina said. Not to attack her. Not to respond. Just to exist, on the record, as yourself. Let the contrast speak without you saying a word. I thought about it for a day. Then I called the Forbes contact. The interview happened at my office on a Thursday afternoon. The journalist, a woman named Claire Weston, was sharp and prepared. She asked about the firm, about methodology, about building something durable in a volatile market. Halfway through, she asked, carefully, about the past year personally. Difficult year teaches you the difference between what's stable and what just looks stable, I said. I've gotten very precise about which is which. She nodded and wrote something down. The article ran 10 days later. One paragraph near the end mentioned a significant personal transition handled with notable composure. No names, no details, just the shape of a man who had been through something and came out sharper. The morning it published, Mila texted me for the first time in a week. So now you're doing press about us. I left it unread for 3 hours, then replied with 2 words, about me. She didn't respond. What I noticed in the days after the Forbes piece was subtle but real, a slight recalibration in how certain people in my professional circle engaged with me. Clients who had been watching from a careful distance reached out. 2 new inquiries came in from firms I've been trying to get in front of for years. Harlan Voss, my longtime competitor, sent a short email. Good piece. Surprised you gave him the time. Call me when you're ready to talk about Charlotte properly. I filed that away. The more significant development came from an unexpected direction. Our building had a small lobby display case near the elevator bank. One of those community bulletin board situations that nobody really looked at. In it, behind glass, was a framed photograph. Mila and me at a Buckhead Business Association gala from 2 years prior, awarded jointly for community investment through the firm's pro bono consulting program. She was laughing. I was looking at her. I asked the building manager to remove it. She said the display rotated quarterly, and it wasn't scheduled for update until June. I told her I'd appreciate an exception. She said she needed to check with the HOA committee. The photo stayed up for another 3 weeks. Every time I passed it on the way to the elevator, I walked by without looking at it. Not out of pain, out of something more deliberate. Some images lose their power the moment you stop feeding them attention. Sabrina subpoenaed the storage facility access logs on a Wednesday, and by Friday afternoon, she had a summary from the forensic accountant we'd brought in 2 weeks earlier. The unit indicator had been accessed 11 times over 7 months. The account was registered to Mila alone, paid with a personal card I hadn't known existed, a card in her name, opened 18 months into our marriage, never mentioned. The forensic accountant found it buried in a credit inquiry I'd run as part of the asset discovery process. Credit limit, $12,000. Current balance, $9,400. She opened it quietly and kept it separate, Sabrina said, walking me through the summary at her desk. That alone establishes a pattern of financial concealment within the marriage. Combined with the Petra Vaughn connection and the foundation account withdrawals, we're looking at a documented pattern, not isolated decisions. What's in the unit? The subpoena covers access records, not contents. But we can infer from the timing of the last visit, 4 days before she had the conversation with you, that she moved items she considered personally valuable. Sabrina set the page down. Her attorney is going to argue that's routine personal property management. We're going to argue it was premeditated asset removal in anticipation of a legal proceeding she was already planning. I thought about the business card I'd found. Petra Vaughn's number in Mila's handwriting. Has Curtis turned anything more on the LLC? I asked. The forensic accountant cross-referenced the Petra Vaughn entity with Ashby's gallery records. 2 deposits into the gallery's operating account in the past 5 months matched the amounts and timing of your joint account withdrawals within a 72-hour window each time. Sabrina looked up. It's not a direct transfer. There's a buffer, probably cash or crypto, but the pattern is tight enough to present. Present where? Krebs requested a second meeting. They want to resolve before we get into formal discovery. She closed the folder. I think they've seen enough of our file to know they don't want a judge looking at it. The second meeting happened the following Tuesday. Same conference room. Same walnut table. This time Krebs came in quieter. Mila wore blue, sat straighter, held a pen she never used. Whatever conversation she'd had with her attorney in the days before this meeting had recalibrated her. Krebs put a modified settlement framework on the table. No claim against the firm. Mila had no ownership stake in Meridian Risk Consulting, and the point was she wasn't pursuing anything in that direction. No spousal support beyond a fixed transitional amount. A request for a share of the joint household accounts, minus the disputed withdrawals. I looked at the number she was proposing to return. It was roughly 40% of what had been taken. Full restitution of the foundation account, I said. Not partial. Krebs started to object. Mila put her hand on the attorney's arm, a small, quiet gesture, and said, "Let me talk." Krebs went still. Mila looked at me directly. Her voice was controlled, but not cold. "I know what I did with that money was wrong. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it wasn't." She paused. "But I need you to understand that what I asked you for wasn't meant to destroy us. I know it did. I know I did. But it wasn't calculated the way you're making it sound. The withdrawals were calculated," I said. "For months, Fridays, when I was traveling. That's not impulsive, Mila. That's a schedule." She looked down at the table. "I'll agree to full restitution of the foundation account," she said quietly. "And I'll sign whatever Sabrina needs about the LLC connection." Sabrina made a note. I said nothing more. Walking to my car afterward, I passed a florist on the ground floor of the office building, one of those small shops with buckets of cut flowers outside. I stopped for no particular reason and stood there for a moment, looking at them. Then I kept walking. Shane Pruitt called that evening to check in. I gave him the short version. "She admitted it in the room," he said. "That doesn't happen often." "No," I said. "It doesn't." "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Like a man who finished a difficult project," I said. "Not happy. Not relieved. Just done with that part." Shane was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That's exactly where you want to be." Dorian Ashby's world didn't collapse dramatically. It dissolved, the way certain structures do when the load-bearing elements are quietly removed one by one until the whole thing simply stops holding up. It started with the Art Basel Atlanta Preview Committee. His gallery had been listed as a feature venue for 3 consecutive years. That spring, his name was absent from the announced roster. No explanation, no press release, just the updated list without him on it. In Atlanta's art community, that kind of omission speaks louder than any statement. Curtis Bowman brought me the first report on a Wednesday morning, setting it on my desk with his usual economy of gesture. 2 of Ashby's primary gallery sponsors had quietly withdrawn. A corporate art acquisition program run by a regional bank, one of his most visible clients, had moved to a competing gallery. The reason given internally, according to Curtis's source, was reputational uncertainty. Nobody had published anything damaging about Dorian Ashby. Nobody needed to. The information we'd assembled had been shared selectively, through professional channels, to people who knew how to act on it without creating a public spectacle. Rafe Quinlan's documentation had reached 2 members of the Charlotte Arts Advisory Board. The Petra Vaughn LLC paperwork had landed with a commercial fraud analyst at a regional financial institution. These were not dramatic gestures. They were targeted, precise, and entirely legal. Sabrina called it positioning. I called it returning the situation to its natural conclusion. The development that caught me off guard came through Harlan Voss. He called on a Thursday afternoon, sounding more measured than usual, which, for Voss, meant he was about to say something he'd thought carefully about. "I'm going to go on record," he said, "with the Charlotte fraud complaint. I've been sitting on it for 2 years because I didn't want the exposure. But I've had conversations this past month with people who've made me understand that staying quiet isn't neutral. It's protective. Of him." A pause. "I'm not in the business of protecting people like Dorian Ashby." "What changed?" I asked. "You did," Voss said simply. "You handled this without making it ugly. I can respect that. And it reminded me that handling something well doesn't mean doing nothing." The formal complaint Voss filed with the North Carolina Commerce Fraud Division was quiet, documented, and impossible to ignore. Within 2 weeks, Ashby's gallery received a request for financial records related to his Charlotte-era business activity. His attorney sent a letter asking for an extension. The extension was denied. By the end of the month, Ashby Fine Arts Group had canceled its 2 remaining scheduled shows. The gallery's Instagram page went private. His personal accounts went silent. Mila texted me once during this period, a short message that read, "I want you to know I had no idea how far this went with him." I read it, set my phone on the desk, and went back to the Nashville client assessment I was finishing. Whether she knew or didn't know was no longer a question I needed answered. Sabrina finalized the separation agreement on a Friday afternoon. Full restitution of the foundation account. Clean division of jointly held assets. No spousal support. A mutual NDA that covered all parties, including Dorian Ashby. Mila signed without revision. I signed 30 minutes later. Walking out of Sabrina's building into the early evening air, I called Shane Pruitt. He picked up on the second ring. It's done, I said. A beat of silence. Then, how do you feel? Like someone just set down a very heavy piece of equipment. I said, not great. Not bad. Just lighter. Shane laughed quietly. That's exactly right, he said. That's what feels like. 4 months after the morning Mila sat across from me at the kitchen table with her rehearsed request and her celery juice, I stood in front of 43 people at a private leadership forum in Charlotte and gave a keynote on decision-making under pressure. I talked about the gap between information and action, how most people wait too long on both ends, either acting before they have a clear picture or stalling once they do. I talked about the difference between structures that look stable and structures that are stable. I didn't talk about my marriage. I didn't need to. The room understood what I was describing, the way audiences sometimes understand more than you say. Afterward, a man approached me near the coffee station. Early 50s, deliberate in the way he moved, the kind of quiet that came from having seen a lot and deciding which parts are worth reacting to. He introduced himself as the founder of a mentorship initiative for men navigating major professional and personal transitions. I've been told you might be interested in lending some time to something like this, he said. I recognize the indirect referral, Shane's work, most likely. Tell me more, I said. The initiative wasn't large. A regional network, mostly men in professional fields who'd been through significant personal disruption and had come out the other side with something useful to share. Not therapy, not victimhood. Strategy, clarity, the practical architecture of rebuilding. I agreed to come in as an occasional contributor. Nothing formal yet, but the door was open. The Charlotte trip also brought an unexpected conversation with Harlan Voss, who had arranged to meet me for dinner after the forum. We sat across from each other in a steakhouse on Tryon Street and had the first genuinely direct conversation we'd ever managed in 4 years of professional friction. He told me more about the Charlotte complaint, about what Ashby had cost him professionally and personally, about the 2 years he'd spent deciding whether the exposure of going public was worth it. You know what finally made me do it, he said, cutting into his steak. I realized I was more afraid of what it said about me to stay quiet than I was of anything Ashby's people could do in response. That's a good reason, I said. Voss looked at me across the table. We should have been talking years ago. Probably, I said. We didn't become friends that night, but we became something more useful. 2 men who understood each other clearly and had decided that was worth more than the competition. Back in Atlanta, I made 2 changes to the townhouse. I converted Mila's old studio into a proper home office. Clean desk, good light, built-in shelving for the reference materials I'd been stacking in corners for years. And I donated the dining table we'd bought together at an overpriced home goods store on our first anniversary. Not dramatically. I just called a donation pickup and scheduled it for Saturday morning. The building finally updated the lobby display case in June. The photograph of Mila and me at the gala came down, replaced by a notice about a summer community garden project. I passed it on the way to the elevator and didn't stop. The foundation account, fully restored, sat in a new individual savings account under my name alone. I hadn't decided what to do with it yet, but I'd stopped thinking about it as money I'd lost. It was capital, and capital, in the right hands, is just possibility waiting for the right moment. Shane's group met the first Thursday of every month. I hadn't missed one since February. The men who came through that room were not men who needed to be saved. They were men who needed a room where the truth was allowed to be exactly what it was. I understood that function better every time I sat down at the table. One evening after the meeting, one of the newer members, a contractor from Marietta, about 36, recently separated, lingered near the door. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something he wasn't sure how to cross. Does it actually get better? He asked. Not sarcastically, just honestly. I thought about the honest answer. It gets clearer, I said. And once you can see clearly, you can build on that. The building part, that's the better. He nodded slowly. I drove home through the Atlanta night, windows down, the city moving around me the way it always does. Indifferent, busy, entirely unimpressed. It used to bother me. Now it felt like exactly the right company to keep.